As if my entire stage show wasn't a bawdy burlesque of is he or isn't he.
When remembering some of the most iconic vampires in horror, you won't find a single list without the mention of Lestat. And if you do, well, that list would just be wrong. Charismatic, seductive, monstrous. Just a few names to describe this icon. I'm obviously talking about Lestat de Lioncourt, from the fictional world of Anne Rice to the AMC series Interview with the Vampire. He's got so much to his character worth talking about, and certainly worth making a whole video on. So, without any further ado, sit back, buckle up, and let me take you on a journey that explores vampiric anatomy of the vampire Lestat de Lioncourt. Here we go! What physically makes Lestat different from a human? Alright, so first things first, a layman, when looking at Lestat, would deem him to be just like you and I at face value. But Anne Rice wrote his appearance with quite a flair. You see, once they're transformed, their bodies are bit by bit, no pun intended, altered. They're stronger, faster, more cunning, and most definitely stay away from depending on ordinary humans to achieve something. The technical upgrades are evident across the original franchise, since Lestat's body ceases to age like mortals, while resisting diseases and also functions almost like a supernatural one. On to the AMC series now to answer this question in their own way, and you'll see that this iteration sells this post-transformation difference through Lestat's behavior. Sam Reed must be given his flowers for his performance, because he really nails playing the part of someone whose body is less physically restrictive and in fact just generally upgraded. His voice, his posture, and his confidence all seem to be evidently better. From the looks of it, his pale white skin, thick blonde hair, and gray eyes, all these factors are what I feel made up for Lestat's X factor. He's able to sell this attractive appearance to others, only to make it easier to get what he wants, when he does so with the reveal of his optimized set of attributes. He's like a controlled predator in more ways than one. How does Lestat's body survive on blood? Well, funny you should ask, and I have to answer this by saying it's different. You be the judge of whether it's a big difference or a bad one. But either way, Lestat's body ceases to function on food and water. In fact, it definitely doesn't need what humans need. The only thing someone like him really needs is blood. It's their essential nutrient. From Anne Rice's stories, it's clear that blood means everything to him. Everything. It's his fuel, his ecstasy, his medicine. Their bodily functions as a result need a better understanding when you bring consuming human blood into the mix. Lestat consumes blood to sustain himself, improve his strength, sharpness, agility, and obviously his powers. It sharpens his senses, and as per the Interview with the Vampire movie, they would be able to sustain themselves longer without consuming blood. This obviously leads to a boost in their strength, but I don't want you to think that they're immune to things that weaken them, such as sunlight, which could still very well turn them into ash. Rice's novel suggests that this act of taking blood is like the only act of relief they know, as something of a pleasure to them. Interestingly, the vampires also get to know a thing or two about the lives of the victims whose blood they're hounding through, experiencing something like an instant life review of them. Odd, but surely a welcome addition, right? The AMC series has a touch of its own to showcase this aspect of Lestat. As per their portrayal, feeding on blood is a sensual act as well as a physiological one, because right after they drink the blood, they seem to regain color and have their energy, alertness, and intensity of their emotions improved then and there. While it's true that blood is Lestat's nutrition, the way he consumes it is unlike how you and I would have our meals. He absorbs his victim's blood like a life force. This makes him feel less like a walking corpse, and if anything, it has him more pumped up, as he's a body running on someone else's energy. Does Lestat need to breathe, or is breath just a performance? I've covered his nutrition, which is something so much different from mortals, as a part of his needs. But another need of ours is breathing. Now, from Anne Rice's world of vampires, you can see that Lestat moves like any of us. He speaks, sings, laughs, and is well able to do anything you and I can. However, it is to be noted that while he can do all of those things I just mentioned, his body doesn't necessarily depend on oxygen the way that we do. From different kinds of vampirism shown in different sources of media, I've understood one thing in particular. A vampire is a state of life that intrinsically mimics human life. It doesn't share the biological necessities and is yet able to do all of those things that we do. The deal with Lestat is that he's clever and he's elegant with his behavioral choices. So in fact, he does use breathing, but only for the sake of performance. When you see him breathing in someone's ear or gasping mid-conversation, it feels like he's one of us as it looks intimately human. But what can I say? He's just that good of an actor. He can survive burial, confinement, stillness, and desertion without worrying about his respiratory requirements. The original Rice mythology also makes it clear that vampires enter a state of hibernation of sorts, which only helps them to conserve their energy, which is what's most likely for Lestat to also be doing. How strong is Lestat compared to a human body? So, with his ability to conserve energy, surely it's obvious at this point that whenever he requires any of his strength, it comes in its supernatural form, right? And that's true. Across the different adaptations of Lestat, you can spot him being an overpowering load to any of his opponents, and that too with ease. He's also quite the force of resistance, and he does that as if the one on offense is nothing but an empty bag. In the AMC series, Lestat is a vampire who is over 150 years old, and his experience only makes this portrayal even more of a threat to others than the previous adaptations have. The same version of Lestat also sheds serious light on the fact that this ability of super strength is still in his control. He's not the Hulk or any other brute that you could think of, regardless of his being able to toss humans around and physically crush human skulls. All of this simply infers that vampire muscles are supernatural in their inherent form, and that these muscles are about density and efficiency over size. It gets even scarier when you recollect what Lestat really looks like, especially after knowing all of this about him. He's got a charm, but his beauty lies. All of that elegance and aristocracy given to someone this animalistic and wild is a one-of-a-kind deception like none ever written in fiction. How fast can Lestat move, and why is it so disturbing? Well, hold up. It's not just his power that's worth talking about when I mention his supernatural traits in particular. There's his speed as well, which adds to Lestat's horror design as a character. While relaxed at one moment, in one corner of the room, you'll never know that he simply eased his way out of a conversation in no time and has gotten to the other corner of the room or left it altogether, seemingly in a bid to appear behind someone or even attack them in an instant. In the older film versions, this is spotted more often than not, and the AMC series has had a throwback of these moments with an amplified version of its own, which is worthy of praise in its own right for the sheer drama of it. Looking at Lestat's speed from an anatomical point of view, it's really crazy to see this inhuman set of reflexes. Obviously, he's got a body that doesn't hesitate or restrain itself as we do, but even on a physical level, this trait is beyond human limits. Vampires can be unnoticeable to the naked eye, as a mere blur when they're moving at full pace. And even then, they can become almost invisible when they cover long distances, according to the lore. This is again really well used in the AMC series, as there are numerous instances of Lestat moving from one point to another in no time, or with any kind of exhaustion. I mentioned the exhaustion bit because speed requires human effort, and a lot of it as well. But Lestat's speed doesn't. There's no run-up or a ready-set-go or even preparation that he needs. This super speed only results in panic among its victims. You can't track him while he's pacing his way out of everyone's side, and the moment you do, it's like a jump scare you've never seen before, nor would you wish to ever again. How does Lestat heal from injury? I've mentioned already that one of the most improved traits of his post-transformation self is his ability to heal himself. It's enhanced and much better anatomically than mortals have. Across Anne Rice's world, he suffers injuries lethal enough to cripple, severely damage, or even kill a human. But not Lestat. He survives, repairs himself, and endures most of the time with quite a bit of ease as well. Keep in mind that healing is a process that requires blood for the sake of going ahead with its function of restoration to an injured part of the body. With Lestat, while he survives any damage to his body, it's the blood he consumes that's like an essential catalyst, which heals him and restores him to his normal vampiric levels. A bullet wound is fairly easy for Lestat, as he can be through with healing that in seconds, but greater damage, maybe even in the form of serious burns caused by fire, could cause him to go through decades or even centuries of recovery. So while there are theories that suggest the pain a vampire would suffer could come back as a resilient boon to them, there's no official bit in any lore to back this up. As of now, strength and age are directly proportionate for sure. Now, unlike standard monster lore, the case of vampires getting injured is more complex to understand. In the AMC series Interview with the Vampire, Lestat has survived poison, has had his throat cut, and has been left for dead. But none of these stopped him from simply returning the next morning, just like that, as if nothing happened. In the novel, Louis and Claudia thought he was dead once and decided to dump him in the swamp, but once again, he survived that as well. And this time, it was due to the blood of the creatures in that very swamp. So yeah, when we're looking at this supernatural aspect of his, I prefer calling it more resilient instead of looking at him as someone who has no weaknesses of any sort. What can Lestat hear that humans can't? Anne Rice's vampires have their senses enhanced post-transformation, and this was one of the creepiest traits of these creatures. But the deal with Lestat is a bit more than the other vampires. He's shown as someone truly gifted, and I make this inference purely from his capabilities. I want you to consider his maxed out senses, and then his awareness, and his perception of things and behaviors around him. All of these go well beyond normal range. Vampires can also hear hearts from a distance, and sometimes they can even do so by eliminating all other sounds to focus their hearing on one particular heart. A vampire like Bruce could track Claudia simply by hearing her name in the air, even if they were miles apart. Lestat can do the same too, as he hears Armand watching him. But, purely as a trait, I see this to be a bit more invasive than the others. Humans enjoy a sense of privacy within their own thoughts and feelings, within themselves. But for Lestat and other vampires, there's no such thing as that. A pro for this trait, however, would be that Lestat can pick up signals from others, be it footsteps, whispers, or even a shift in someone's heartbeat, all of which act like cues in one way or another. This is a kind of dominance that vampires possess in every aspect over mortal human beings, that even senses and their ceilings are deemed to be broken naturally to them, and they're omnipotent and their omnipresent selves. Is Lestat's mind part of his anatomy as well? As per Anne Rice's mythology, a vampire's mind and his body powers aren't separate, and if anything, the former becomes a part of the predatory lifestyle itself. And that makes sense when you see Lestat dominate, manipulate, seduce, and influence who he chooses to, primarily with a mind like that, which can make things like those happen. In the AMC show, it's shown how the mind sees the vampire's influence through eye contact, stillness, and poses as a constant psychological threat. This is key to know for Lestat's case in particular too, because he doesn't limit his abilities to mere physical skill sets. There's an active consciousness within him, capable of causing harm and to achieve his vampiric goals by itself. You don't need to imagine how threatening someone can be if they've mastered psychological as well as physical influence, because a real example is right here in Lestat. Can Lestat fly? And what does that mean for his vampire physics? Interestingly, according to Anne Rice's lore, flight is uncommon for regular vampires, in a way that it's an ability flaunted only by the particularly powerful ones or if they're really old. For modern viewers, the AMC series has shown Lestat to possess abilities well beyond strength and speed, and has hinted that he's capable of doing certain impossible feats as well. Here, he describes flight by calling it the cloud gift, as he even says things like arising at will and propelling in a direction by decision. From what we do know, it is true that he can fly, and that too fast enough to reach into the clouds. The Vampire Lestat novel explains the origins of his ability to fly, with a part where Lestat receives blood from ancient vampires, such as Marius and Akasha. Only after which does he notice his abilities extend to include flight, telekinesis, and the ability to survive exposure to the sun. I must say that instead of trying to figure out his ability to fly scientifically, I'd suggest you see it as a piece of evidence that suggests how unrestricted Lestat's body gets when empowered in such a way that it defies laws of physics for someone with a human body. I see the impossible being made possible by Lestat in this department to truly be a horror element. Because what do you mean there's a human body that could just leave the ground with such elegance? What happens to Lestat's body when he drinks more powerful blood? While I did take you through the process of a vampire like Lestat who functions on blood and how it affects his body, there's a higher incentive in a very specific kind of blood for vampires as well. As per Anne Rice's mythology, the vampire's body is altered based on whose blood gave you birth, whose blood raised you, and what kind of blood they drink. So basically, you could say that studying the anatomy of a vampire is not fixed. Here, I've learned that stronger blood leads to greater, more positive results than a normal person's blood. Resilience, psychic powers, and speed are all boosted, even more so in such cases. Take Lestat, for example, who has an insane power gain when he feasts upon blood from Magnus, Marius, and Akasha, especially with Akasha's, to whom he even says that because of the presence of her blood in him, he's become almost impossible to kill. And in the off chance of that happening, then the boosted resilience in him due to this would come in really handy for Lestat. This part of vampire anatomy brings in an added condition to keep in mind, as these creatures are enhanced through various different moments in their life, unlike our mortal selves when we stop growing or developing our organs after a certain age. Also, the idea of power in Anne Rice's world seems more aristocratic when you look at it at this point. It suggests the idea that power is biological, but at the same time, dynastic in nature as well. How different is Tom Cruise's Lestat from Sam Reed's Lestat physically? Tom Cruise portrayed Lestat de Lioncourt in the 1994 movie Interview with the Vampire. He plays in a theatrical way, which to me makes him look predatory for sure, but also like a feline in many ways. And that's a compliment, since the film itself is greatly inspired by old-school gothic horror. Years later, the AMC series of the same title has Sam Reed play off Lestat in a fairly different manner. Credit to the script and the style of storytelling here, which has him shift Lestat's portrayal into making him seem more intimate, yet psychologically threatening at the same time. This is made more obvious with the great camera work, which captures every little moment like his posture, movement, and voice. Physically speaking, they're obviously the same character, just speaking different languages. But not too different either, keep that in mind. Tom Cruise is a self-indulgent hunter straight out of a gothic painting, while Sam Reed is like an obsessed lover whose next step you can't possibly predict in very many circumstances. He's even described as a mess in the series multiple times. But, all in all, it's up to you to decide which portrayal you think is the better one, or rather, the one you're more connected with. How different is the Queen of the Damned Lestat? Well, I mentioned the two most popular Lestats. I don't want you to forget Stuart Townsend's version from Queen of the Damned. He's like an immortal rock star whose behavior and actions are unlike other adaptations, in a way that this version has him act like a superhero even more openly than ever. Here, Lestat is not a monster hiding in plain sight amongst mortal lives around us, but he's not a creature so far apart from the original character either. He still possesses his standard superhuman abilities and even more, such as telekinesis and pyrokinesis. Along with that, the film has a concept it keeps pushing, which is stronger blood equals stronger vampire. Which makes sense because Townsend's iteration was mainly about Lestat's spectacle, along with his ability to command. While Queen of the Damned may be seen as a project that exaggerates the usual Lestat portrayal, I personally believe that it's a solid adaptation, where we see a little more out there Lestat, openly boasting his vampirical stuff and his super traits. What does the comic add to Lestat's physical horror? You know that there's a comic adaptation from 1990, right? To me, comics have had some of the most important influences in the world of visual horror, and a graphic novel of the vampire Lestat just seems made to be from the very beginning, especially with literalizing elegance, injury, and horror in Lestat's case. Additionally, in comics, the added emphasis on vampirism, given the history of vampires in comics, is clearly evident here with the graphics of an injured and recovering flesh, the stillness, the theatricality of vampires, and the aristocracy in general of the world. If you give the comic book a read, I'm sure you'll see a more glossy version of Lestat, who looks like he's waiting to be worshipped. And that is exactly why this medium works so well for Lestat. What's Lestat's most predatory physical trait? I have described the different traits of Lestat that can have you deservedly call him a predator. But what's the most apex trait amongst them? I know that you'll greatly struggle with picking just one, so I'll go ahead and say that it's his body. Totally. It's got it all. And intrinsically speaking, it's very well capable of causing a great deal of harm to whoever Lestat picks. Beauty, appetite, control, added up with an immense set of physical behaviors like luring, performing, listening, closing in, and so much more. It really makes me believe that his body was anatomically structured to be a constant physical threat, regardless of the added supernatural traits he eventually possesses. Sam Reed once described Lestat as someone who sought out weakness, reveled in the exploitation of it. Lestat was called a horror by Louis, since his voice, as well as what he says, comes out like canaries, summer fruit in the dead of winter. What's the scariest thing about Lestat's anatomy? There's so much that you could talk about for Lestat's anatomy, and I hope I've covered a whole lot from that. He's one scary individual, but for a layman, he's just a human, and that fear factor doesn't step in until you see his behavior. And this is exactly why I believe this is his scariest possible trait. He looks human. He plays a human like an Oscar-winning actor, but it's all a trap. He can continue thriving as a vampire only because he's able to pull off a human being through his performance. Lestat is a chaotic mess, in a way that he's detailed and meticulous with his plans, but that's only for the lead-up until he's just a whisker away from taking the last step to his objectives. That's when he's wild, animalistic, and simply vampirical in nature. And that's our video for today. I hope you had a great time in this vampirical anatomy of the vampire Lestat, one of the most iconic vampires ever written in horror. His idiosyncrasies, his supernatural abilities, and his needs are what make him such a menace. A human on the outside and nothing resembling one on the inside, and with his intentions. This was Lestat de Lioncourt for you. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and comment down below on what you really like about the character of Lestat and why. Finally, please subscribe to Marvelous Videos for more content just like this. Until next time, take care, and as always, stay marvelous.